All right. The final concept I want to talk about in terms of language is the idea of hot words. Now, remember, how do we understand what a particular word means? Well, we have to build up associations around it, right? So it would be fair to say that the words that have been around the longest in our own lives are the ones that have built up the most reference experiences, right? It's kind of like the pearl that's been in the ocean the longest is the largest because it's collected the most amount of shells over time as time went by. Make sense? So as a rule, hot words tend to be those words that you first learned as a child. They tend to be shorter, smaller. I assume that none of you, you're the first word out of your mouths was something like, anti-disestablishmentarianism. Maybe. But there will be simple concepts like me, you, baby, cry, happy. Do you see how they're much more loaded than words? For example, and there's an example, it's kind of a grim example, but I kind of like to use it, maybe because I'm a bit grim. What's the difference between saying the baby died or the baby burnt to death? That's a harsh, do you feel the emotion of that? What about if I say the infant perished in the flames? Just consider. I've said exactly the same thing, haven't I? Content-wise, it is exactly the same thing. The information is exactly the same, isn't it? Yes. And yet, you respond more powerfully to one than the other. Why? Because baby has stronger associations, has richer associations, has more emotional associations than infant. Infant is a word we use to dissociate from the babiness of it. We describe it as a smaller version of whatever that child race is. But it has fewer associations, it has less emotive associations. It's more dissociated, it's more distant. So we can handle the concept of a infant perishing in flames much more easily than that of a baby burning to death. Do you understand what I mean by this? And I apologize for the grim metaphor, but I like to use it just because it just really demonstrates very powerfully what I mean by hot words. Does that make sense? Now, luckily, you can use this in the reverse as well, in terms of the positives you put inside people's minds. So the baby lived forever, yay! Got out of that one. I'm not teaching you anymore. I don't know. All right. So I'd like to introduce you to a couple of, shall we say, universal hot words that you can kind of pretty much pepper into anything you do, on the understanding, of course, that this is just a tiny example of just a vast vocabulary. If you want to pick up more hot words, do you know where you go to find them really easily? Right? Talk to children. Right? Because they're the ones using them. They're the ones who've got the most associations built up to them. The other place you can go is the places that we normally don't want to go because we consider ourselves too good for that. We're talking about the lower brow press, like the National Enquirer, right? Which is, of course, the font of all wisdom and a great deal of truth inside it. But the way it's written is almost exclusively using hot words, because it's easier to read. Have you ever noticed that certain articles, like Cosmopolitan, for example, ladies in the room, it's easy to read because they focus more on the hot words than the longer, more erudite words, which are harder for us to read because we have less facility with them, we're less used to them. Now, of course, certain circles like academia, they're used to these words more. They're used to speaking with these words more easily than with hot words because they've stopped using them because they felt they were too dumbing down. So again, your audience will require different language as you go through it. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that. So depending on the audience that we're working with, we can go from maybe short, like powerful hot words to more like eloquent, longer words, depending on like...
Right. So the question is, depending on the audience that you're working with, you can move between shorter hot words that have more impact through to the more eloquent, longer perhaps words. And the answer is yes, although you still want to be using both. Remember, as a rule, hot words will have a stronger emotional drive behind them. And if you want to have a stronger emotional drive, even a 60-year-old academic will still respond to them because they still build up all those reference experiences. The way you may want to use it, though, is that you may want to change the mixture of them. So even though you're talking about academics, you might start talking about, I know, the intellectual rules of a friendly interaction are vastly superior to the uninitiated examples of small children. I don't know. Right? The point is, I'm using primarily the vocabulary they're used to, but I'm then weaving in simple words like friendly, easy, natural, and so on. Right? And that fits that context as well. The experiment was performed using natural reagents, so that we could easily tell which group would respond more fully. Do you see how you still weave those in? So the question is not whether or not is it all one or all the other. The question is what blend, what mix do you use, and the blend fits the audience. Does that kind of make sense to you guys? Okay? And by the way, if there's any teachers along in the room, it's a great way of teaching as well. You start off with a simpler vocabulary, and over time you gradually introduce a more complex vocabulary so that it kind of transitions naturally from one to the other. It's just a simple teaching point if you are teaching languages. And if you're not, then it's free anyway. So the kind of hot words you can start playing with, you've heard me use quite a few of them. And again, please bear in mind, these are just really simple examples. There's no magic in them. They're not any better than anything else you might use. They just fit the kind of themes that we've been talking about today. And with all of these, you can add the tag "ly" and make him more useful, right? Friend or friendly, wonderful, wonderfully, gentle, gently, soft, softly. So that gives you a little bit more scope on how to use them. Does that make sense to you guys? So now we're using a more emotionally loaded vocabulary. And by the way, where do emotions come from? The unconscious, right? Do you choose your emotions on purpose? Hey, today I'm going to be very happy. Yes, I'm happy now, right? Some people can do that, by the way, but it's only because they've created the same internal reference experiences that when they say, today I'm going to be happy, the unconscious mind goes, well, all right. It becomes a self-suggestion. Most people have to do something to be happy. For example, think of positive memories, recall one of their good experiences, talk to a friend that they like. In other words, you're self-stimulating your own associational network to feel differently, because ultimately it's your unconscious mind that is producing or generating the emotion. Does that make sense to you? When you start using hot words, this vocabulary here, you're triggering those associations straight away. And culturally speaking, you can, in terms of people who speak English versus people who don't, right? You can have a pretty good idea of how people will respond to these. Now, these aren't universal. Someone who has been jilted and been stabbed in the back by a friend will probably respond to the word friend very differently because that's been mixed into their associational set. Make sense? So I'd be lying to you if I said this is a universal, always perfectly true every time and so on. We are stacking the deck. It's another little pencil in our set. It may or may not be the one thing that makes a difference, but at least you have more choices. Make sense? So here's the exercise. What I want you to do is, again, go back. Use the power words as a base, right? Use the trance themes as a base. Use your similes to enrich those two things. And this time, add into the mix modifiers to soften it, make it easier to swallow, like sugarcoat the pill, and hot words to bring more emotion into it, to make it more impactful in the way that the message is received. Make sense? Would you like an example of what I mean? Only listen to me gradually as you relax your mind enough to feel this wonderful sense of knowing what's going on. Because everyone knows how to relax and make connections easily. Now, gently allow your mind to feel whatever relaxation begins to occur now, so that you can easily turn that relaxation into enough comfort that you might gradually begin to feel good. It's a friendly sensation, relaxing, and feeling as though you're drifting on a cloud. It's like waking up in the morning and feeling that warm glow of lying in bed and knowing that you can stay there as long as you wish. It's easy, a gentle feeling of relaxation, focusing your mind on how easy all this stuff is. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Do you understand the exercise? So, don't think too much though. So find a partner and let's spend a few minutes apiece. Just go a couple of those cycles and then we'll come back and we'll finish up before we break. Okay? Off you go.